Part 1. Morning like any other. At 6:17 a.m., the river looked the way it always did. Gray, heavy, patient. Anton Moros had lived beside it for 39 years, long enough to stop noticing it most days. The river ran behind his apartment building like a permanent thought, always there, rarely acknowledged. In spring it swelled, in winter it froze, in summer it smelled faintly of mud and metal. It had moods, but it never surprised anyone anymore. Anton stood on his narrow balcony with a chipped mug of coffee warming his hands. The city was just waking up. A bus sighed at the corner. Somewhere below, a dog barked once and stopped. The air carried that early morning stillness that made even a noisy city feel briefly honest. Today was supposed to be simple. He would go to work. He would finish paperwork that never truly ended. He would come home tired, eat leftovers, maybe scroll through his phone longer than he should, and sleep. Tomorrow would look almost exactly the same. He liked that. After everything that had happened in his life, the things he rarely allowed himself to name, predictability felt like mercy. Anton checked his watch. 6:21. 5 more minutes, he murmured, though no one was listening. From the balcony, he could see the river's surface barely moving, reflecting the pale sky. A barge far downstream cut through the water like a scar, slow and inevitable. Nothing warned him. Not the air, not the light, not the quiet. Inside, his phone buzzed on the kitchen table. A message from his sister. Katia, did you feel that? Anton frowned. Feel what? He typed a reply but stopped when the floor beneath his feet gave a soft, unfamiliar shudder. Not strong enough to be frightening, just enough to be wrong. The mug rattled against the balcony railing. Coffee sloshed over the edge, dark drops falling toward the street far below. Anton froze. The city had its share of vibrations, trucks, construction, trains, but this wasn't any of those. This felt deeper, slower, as if something enormous had shifted its weight far away and the ground was only now realizing it. Then it stopped. Silence rushed back in, embarrassed, pretending nothing had happened. Anton exhaled, half laughing at himself. Nothing, he said aloud. It's nothing. He stepped back into the kitchen, wiped the coffee from his hand, and picked up his phone. Before he could reply to Katia, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then they stayed on. Anton stared at the ceiling, listening. No sirens. No shouting. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant city. Still, his stomach felt tight. He typed. Anton. Probably construction. You know how it is. 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared. Katia didn't answer. Anton shrugged it off, finished his coffee, and got dressed. He put on his jacket, checked that he had his keys, and headed for the door. As he locked it behind him, he noticed something odd in the stairwell. The air smelled different. Damp. Earthy. Like rain mixed with stone. Strange, he muttered, but kept going. Outside, the street was busier now. People walked with their heads down, phones glowing in their hands. A cyclist weaved through traffic. Someone laughed loudly near the bakery. Life, uninterrupted. Anton joined the flow toward the bus stop. As he waited, he glanced back toward the river out of habit, and frowned. The barge he'd seen earlier was gone. Not downstream. Not farther along. Gone. In its place, the water looked disturbed, swirling in wide, slow circles, as if confused about which direction it was supposed to go. Anton squinted. Rivers didn't do that. A man beside him, older, wearing a worn cap, noticed Anton staring. You see it too? The man asked quietly. See what? The man nodded toward the water. It's pulling, he said. Backward. Anton followed the line of his finger. The river, the same river that had always moved in one direction, was subtly, undeniably flowing the wrong way. Not fast, but enough. Anton's phone buzzed violently in his pocket. This time it wasn't Katia. It was an emergency alert. Part 2. The first official explanation. The alert didn't make sense at first. Anton read it twice, then a third time. Emergency notice. Unusual hydrological activity detected. Residents near the river are advised to remain calm and avoid the waterfront until further notice. That was it. No instructions. No reason. No timeline. The man in the cap snorted softly. They always say remain calm when they don't know what's happening. Anton nodded without taking his eyes off the river. The movement was clearer now. The surface rippled in the wrong direction, as if the water had suddenly remembered something upstream it needed to return to. Debris, leaves, bits of trash, a floating bottle. Drifted against the current Anton had known his whole life. People nearby began to notice. A woman lifted her phone and started filming. A pair of teenagers laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of illusion. A delivery driver stopped his truck in the middle of the street, climbed out, and stared openly. Sirens sounded in the distance. Anton's phone rang. Katya. He answered immediately. You felt it too, didn't you? Her voice was tight. Anton, something's wrong. The river by the bridge. There's a patrol blocking it off. And my neighbor says her basement flooded even though the water level hasn't risen. That doesn't make sense. I know. That's why I'm calling. Anton looked again at the river. I'm right by it. It's flowing backward. There was a pause on the line. Then Katya whispered, Don't joke. I'm not. Another pause. Longer this time. Listen, she said finally. If they start evacuating, come to my place. Okay. Okay. They hung up. The bus arrived late, its doors hissing open. People climbed aboard, but the driver leaned out, scanning the river with visible unease. You riding or not? He called. Anton hesitated. Going to work suddenly felt absurd. Whatever this was, it wasn't something you ignored and filed reports through. He stepped back from the curb. I'll walk, he said. The driver shrugged, closed the doors, and pulled away. Anton turned toward the river path, but a temporary metal barrier had already been set up, blocking access. 2 police officers stood nearby, trying, and failing, to look authoritative. Excuse me, Anton said, approaching one of them. What's happening? The officer gave a practiced smile. Maintenance issue. There's been a temporary redirection upstream. Redirection of what? Anton asked. Gravity. The officer's jaw tightened. Sir, please step back. A shout rose from farther down the river. People were pointing. Anton pushed closer, ignoring the officer's protest. That's when he saw it. A section of the river's surface, about 10 meters wide, was folding inward on itself. Not collapsing, not draining, but bending, as if the water had become soft glass. The flow there twisted, curling backward, dragging everything nearby into its slow, deliberate turn. Someone screamed. A small motorboat, untethered from the shore, lurched as the water beneath it shifted. The rope snapped with a sharp crack. The boat drifted directly into the warped section of current. Get it out, someone yelled. But there was nothing anyone could do. The boat tilted sharply, its engine sputtering, and then, without sinking, slid sideways and vanished. Not under the water. Into it. The surface smoothed over immediately, as if embarrassed by the display. Silence fell like a blanket. No one spoke. No one breathed. One of the officers turned pale. Anton felt his legs weaken. This wasn't a flood. This wasn't erosion. This wasn't any natural disaster he'd ever heard of. This was something breaking the rules. Phones began ringing everywhere at once. Emergency alerts followed one after another, each vaguer than the last. Avoid waterways. Public transport delays expected. Please remain indoors if possible. A man near Anton laughed hysterically. Remain indoors? What? Is the river coming for us now? As if in answer, the ground shuddered again. Stronger this time. Anton staggered, catching himself on the barrier. Buildings groaned. A car alarm wailed. And then, slowly, impossibly, the river began to rise. Not in height. In shape. The surface bulged upward in the center, forming a smooth, rounded swell, like a breath being held. Anton's chest tightened. Is that? Someone whispered. The bulge grew, water climbing itself, defying everything Anton knew about physics. It wasn't a wave. It didn't move forward. It stayed in place, waiting. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker somewhere. Attention! Please move away from the riverbank immediately. Too late. The bulge split open, and something came out. Part 3. What the water returned. At first, Anton thought it was debris. Something dark and irregular, rising slowly from the open water. People shouted warnings, some backing away, others stepping closer despite themselves. Phones were raised again, hands trembling now. The thing emerged inch by inch. It wasn't alive. That realization came with no comfort. It was a car. An old one, sedan, dark blue, its paint dulled by years underwater. River weeds clung to the mirrors. Mud streamed from the wheel wells. The windows were intact, clouded from the inside. The car hovered halfway out of the river, balanced impossibly by the bulging water beneath it. Anton felt a strange pressure behind his eyes, like a headache forming too fast. That car, someone said. That looks like. No. Another voice cut in sharply. That can't be. The water lowered itself gently, setting the car onto the riverbed as if placing it down with care. The surface flattened again. The current resumed, still backward, but steady now. Silence stretched. Then the screams began. A woman pushed through the crowd, sobbing openly. That's my husband's car, she cried. That's his car. Officers tried to stop her, but she slipped past them, running toward the water. It disappeared 8 years ago. They said it was an accident. Anton's heart hammered. 8 years. The river didn't return random things. It returned lost things. Divers arrived within minutes, though it felt longer. They worked with urgent caution, as if afraid the river might change its mind. When they opened the car doors, the smell reached the crowd. Old water, decay, memory. There were remains inside. Anton turned away, swallowing hard. This wasn't spectacle anymore. This was grief resurfacing, literal and unavoidable. News crews arrived almost instantly. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Officials in dark coats began speaking urgently into phones, their faces tight with fear they couldn't hide. Anton's phone buzzed again. Katia. Katia. Anton. Come now. The bridge near me. Something's coming out of the river there too. His hands shook as he typed. Anton. What is it? 3 dots. Then. Katia. A bus. Anton felt the ground tilt beneath him. His memories moved faster than his thoughts. A yellow city bus. Rain. Screeching brakes. The sound of metal tearing. He hadn't been on that bus, but he had been standing at the stop. 10 years ago, Anton broke into a run. He pushed through crowds, ignored shouted warnings, followed side streets toward the bridge. Sirens chased him, their wails blending into a constant scream that filled the city. As he ran, the city changed. People weren't just watching anymore. They were searching, faces tight with hope, fear, dread. Some cried out names toward the water. Others stared as objects emerged. A motorcycle lost decades ago, a fishing boat reported stolen, a child's bicycle rusted and bent. The river was undoing disappearances. At the bridge, chaos ruled. Police lines had broken. People pressed dangerously close to the edge, drawn by something huge rising beneath the water. Anton skidded to a stop just as the front of the bus broke the surface. It was yellow, faded, but unmistakable. A woman near him collapsed, wailing. My son was on that bus. Anton's vision blurred. The bus had crashed during a storm years ago, skidded off the bridge, smashed through the barrier, vanished into the swollen river below. Bodies were recovered, but not all. Not all. The river lifted the bus like a confession forced into the open. Anton remembered standing there that night, soaked and shaking, watching emergency lights paint the water red and blue. He remembered telling the police he hadn't seen anything because he hadn't wanted to admit he'd been distracted, because he'd been looking at his phone instead of the road. If he'd shouted, if he'd waved, if he'd done anything. The bus settled into place, water cascading from its broken windows. A diver surfaced, pulling himself onto the bridge, his face ashen. There are still people inside, he said hoarsely. Anton staggered back. This wasn't coincidence. The river wasn't just returning the dead. It was returning responsibility. His phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number. Against his better judgment, Anton answered. Anton Moros, a calm voice said. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez with the International Geological Response Council. We need to talk to you. Why? Anton whispered. There was a brief pause. Because, she said carefully, the river stopped changing after you arrived. Part 4. The Weight of Witness. They took Anton through streets that no longer felt like his own. Police escorts forced paths through crowds. People shouted questions, accusations, prayers. Someone grabbed Anton's sleeve, eyes wild. Did you lose someone too? The man begged. Anton didn't answer. He didn't trust his voice. They led him into a temporary command center set up in a municipal building overlooking the river. The windows were covered, but the sound of helicopters pressed through the walls like a headache. Inside, the air buzzed with overlapping conversations. Engineers, military officers, scientists, politicians. Maps covered the walls, marked with red lines and frantic notes. Every screen showed the same thing from different angles. The river, reversing itself in sections, returning objects with surgical precision. Dr. Elena Vasquez met him near the center of the room. She was younger than he'd expected. Early 40s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp but exhausted. She held a tablet against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Moros," she said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "I didn't volunteer," Anton replied. "No," she agreed. "You didn't." She gestured him toward a quieter corner. "Why me?" Anton asked the moment they were alone. "I don't know anything about rivers." Dr. Vasquez studied him for a long moment. "Tell me about the bus accident." Anton's breath caught. "I told the police everything." "I've read your statement," she said gently. "I'm asking what you remember." He looked down at his hands. They were still shaking. "I remember the rain," he said. "I remember looking at my phone. I remember hearing the crash and thinking, just for a second, that it was thunder." Dr. Vasquez nodded. "And how often have you thought about it since?" "Every year," Anton said quietly. "On the anniversary?" "Every day?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yes." Dr. Vasquez tapped her tablet. "You weren't the only witness who survived that night. But you're the only one still living within 50 meters of the river." Anton frowned. So, she said, every major reemergence point today correlates with a living witness, someone who was present at the event but never fully processed it. Anton stared at her. "You're saying this is happening because of us?" "I'm saying the river is responding to unresolved observation," she replied. "We think." "That's insane." "Yes," she agreed calmly. "But so is a river returning a bus." A sudden shout rose from across the room. "Doctor, we've got another manifestation, upstream this time." Dr. Vasquez's jaw tightened. She turned back to Anton. "Come with me." They moved to a monitor showing a live feed from a rural stretch of river. The water bulged again. This time, what emerged was smaller. A wooden rowboat. It settled gently against the bank. Inside lay a single object, a child's red shoe. Anton's chest tightened. The feed switched to another location. Another object. Another witness screaming. The river wasn't random. It was methodical. "Why now?" Anton asked. "Why today?" Dr. Vasquez lowered her voice. "Because the river has been dammed, redirected, poisoned, measured, and controlled for centuries. And last month, a major upstream project altered its flow permanently." Anton remembered reading about it. A new industrial channel. Faster transport. More efficiency. "Water remembers paths," she continued. "We think it also remembers interruptions." Anton shook his head. "You're talking like it's alive." "No," she said. "I'm talking like it's a record." A sudden tremor shook the building, stronger than any before. Alarms blared. "Doctor," someone yelled. "The river's no longer returning objects. It's returning events." "What does that mean?" Anton asked. Dr. Vasquez didn't answer immediately. The screen showed the river surface flattening unnaturally smooth. Then, like a reflection without a source, shapes formed in the air above the water. Ghostly. Translucent. A car skidded, replaying its fatal slide. A boat capsized again and again. A child fell from the bank, endlessly. Time itself was spilling back out. "This isn't about the dead," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "It's about the moments we refuse to hold." Anton felt something click into place. "What happens when it finishes?" he asked. Dr. Vasquez looked at him, eyes dark. "We don't think it will stop on its own." Part 5. What the river asked for. The city crossed a threshold sometime after noon. There was no announcement. No single moment anyone could point to later and say that's when it happened. Just a gradual unraveling, like a seam giving way one thread at a time. Traffic stopped first. Drivers abandoned cars in the middle of intersections, running toward the river or away from it, depending on what they'd lost there. Phones stopped ringing because networks were overwhelmed. News anchors began to sound less certain, then openly afraid. And the river kept working. Not faster, not louder, more deliberately. Anton stood beside Dr. Vasquez at the command center window when the order came to evacuate all river-adjacent districts. "It won't help," she said softly after hanging up the phone. "It's not following geography anymore." "What do you mean?" Anton asked. She pointed. The river had begun to branch, thin streams of water lifting themselves from the main flow and crawling along streets, sidewalks, alleyways. Not flooding, choosing. Each branch moved toward something specific. A house, a bridge, a warehouse, a place where something had happened and never been fully acknowledged. "This is impossible," Anton whispered. Dr. Vasquez watched with an expression that mixed awe and dread. So is denial at this scale. A shout went up behind them. We found a pattern, a data analyst yelled. Every manifestation aligns with a memory spike in at least one living person nearby. Guilt, grief, fear, strong unresolved emotion. Anton felt cold. You said nearby, he said. How near? Dr. Vasquez met his eyes. Close enough to witness. The room shook again, but this time the vibration felt focused, localized. Anton turned slowly. The river branch outside the building had stopped moving. It waited. For him. I think, Dr. Vasquez said carefully. The river has identified you as a convergence point. That's insane, Anton said. I'm nobody. You're a witness who never spoke, she replied. And you've lived beside the river ever since. Anton's memories surged. 10 years of walking past that water. 10 years of not stopping. 10 years of telling himself the past was past. What does it want, he asked. Dr. Vasquez hesitated. Then she said the one thing no scientist should have said out loud. It wants the truth to be present. The alarms cut out suddenly. Every screen in the room went dark. Outside, the city fell unnaturally quiet. Then the river spoke. Not with sound. With images. Anton staggered as visions flooded his mind. Not just his own, but others. He saw a woman watching her brother fall from a dock and saying nothing because she was afraid. A factory manager ignoring safety reports. A politician signing permits knowing the risks. The river wasn't accusing. It was revealing. This is too much, Anton gasped. People can't handle this. Dr. Vasquez looked pale. Neither can the city. Structural collapse is imminent. If this continues. It won't, Anton said suddenly. She stared at him. What? Anton understood now. The river wasn't forcing memories back into the world. It was asking permission. Bring me to the bridge, Anton said. That's a restricted. Now, he said, and his voice carried a weight that surprised even him. They moved fast. The bridge where the bus had fallen was nearly empty now. The crowd had scattered, leaving behind flowers, candles, abandoned shoes. The river pulsed beneath, heavy with unfinished moments. Anton stepped to the edge. The water rose slightly, attentive. I see you, he said, voice shaking. I saw it happen. I was there. I looked away. The river stilled. Helicopters hovered at a distance. No one spoke. I was afraid, Anton continued. I didn't want to be responsible, so I stayed silent. And I've lived beside you ever since, pretending that meant nothing. The water climbed the bridge supports, not threatening, listening. I can't undo it, Anton said. But I won't hide it anymore. He took a breath that felt like tearing something loose inside his chest. I testify, he said. The words echoed, not outward, but inward. The river responded. The backward current slowed. The branches withdrew. Across the city, people cried out as visions faded, not erased, but settled, anchored in memory where they belonged. The river didn't forget, but it no longer needed to show. Anton collapsed to his knees. Dr. Vasquez caught him before he fell. Part 6. After the current expanded. The river did not snap back to normal. It settled. That distinction mattered, though few people could articulate why. Scientists would later argue about flow metrics and sediment displacement, but anyone who stood near the water that evening felt it. The river moved again in the correct direction. Yes, but it did so with a heaviness, like something that had finished speaking and was now waiting to be understood. The city exhaled all at once. Sirens faded. Helicopters peeled away. Emergency broadcasts shifted from commands to reassurances. The words under control began to appear again, though no one fully believed them. Anton sat on the curb near the bridge long after officials asked him to move. His legs felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Dr. Vasquez stayed nearby, speaking quietly into her phone, giving measured answers she clearly didn't have. People passed Anton without recognizing him. That, too, mattered. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a symbol. He was simply a man who had finally said what he should have said years ago. And that was enough. The first night. That night, the city did not sleep. Windows glowed late into the dark. Conversations spilled out onto balconies and sidewalks. Families called each other, not to ask if they were safe, but to talk. To ask questions that had been avoided for years. Do you remember when? I never told you this, but I should have said something. Hospitals reported no unusual injuries. But an unprecedented number of people came in simply because they felt unwell, disoriented, or overwhelmed. Doctors called it acute stress response. Patients called it everything coming back at once. Along the river, candles burned in lines that stretched for kilometers. Some marked names. Others didn't. Some people stood in silence. Others spoke to the water, softly, as if it might still be listening. Anton watched from his apartment window. He hadn't turned on the lights. The river reflected the candles like scattered stars, moving steadily downstream, carrying nothing backward anymore. He slept for 2 hours, then woke suddenly, heart racing. For a moment, he thought the river was rising again. It wasn't. The sound he heard was his own breathing. The statements. Anton's first official statement was supposed to be brief. It lasted 47 minutes. He sat at a plain table, cameras pointed at him, hands folded tightly in front of a microphone. His voice shook at first. Then it steadied, not because he became confident, but because he ran out of places to hide. I was there, he said. I didn't cause the accident, but I witnessed it. And I chose silence because it was easier. A reporter asked, "Do you believe you're responsible for what happened?" Anton thought carefully before answering. "I believe responsibility doesn't end where comfort begins." That sentence would be quoted for weeks. He gave 3 more statements over the next month. Each time, fewer cameras came. Each time, more ordinary people listened. Some thanked him. Some blamed him. Some said nothing at all. Anton accepted all of it. What changed? The river never did it again. No objects returned. No visions surfaced. No backward currents appeared. But something else changed instead. Accident investigations reopened, not because of new evidence, but because witnesses came forward voluntarily. Not all cases led to convictions. Not all stories ended cleanly. But they were spoken. Environmental policies stalled when citizens demanded something unexpected, not just safety, but acknowledgement. Memorial spaces replaced parking lots. Names were etched where blank stone used to be. Dr. Vasquez published a paper that was quietly rejected by every major journal. She wasn't surprised. She framed a single sentence from it and hung it in her office. Observation, when denied, accumulates pressure. She and Anton stayed in occasional contact. They never spoke much about the river itself. They didn't need to. Leaving the river, Anton moved in early autumn. He chose a neighborhood far from any major body of water, not out of fear, but because he no longer needed to live beside a reminder. On his last morning, he walked down to the river one final time. It was ordinary again. Gray, heavy, patient. He stood there quietly, hands in his pockets, feeling no urge to speak. The river flowed on. That, too, was enough. Years later, a teacher would tell the story to her class, not as fact, not as myth, but as something in between. Why did the river do it? A student would ask. The teacher would pause. Because, she'd say slowly, sometimes the world holds things until we're ready to admit they happened. Some students would roll their eyes. Some wouldn't. And somewhere, far away, a river would keep moving forward, carrying history with it, not buried, not erased, just finally allowed to exist.